You're live.
Good morning, everyone in Ossining, and welcome to our second of a three-part sessions on public engagement specific to police reform based on executive order that came to us in midsummer. I want to welcome everybody from the community that's here. Next week will be the third session, which is going to be in Spanish. Today's session is focused on African-American community. Everyone is welcome to speak. I wanted to just make some introduction. We have Richard Brady and company from Matrix Consulting, who was hired to help us put together the focus groups and the interviews that went on, and a series of meetings and research and a survey and then analyze the survey really in the form of project management, and was chosen to help us on behalf of the Board of Trustees. We have our trustees, I think 4 of the 5 trustees are on, our corporation council is on, and some staff members who are kind enough to also help us in the process of this public engagement. I just wanted to go through a couple of things. You're going to see a short presentation by Matrix that was developed by a working group, a working committee of 18 members of our community, a quite diverse group of people with lots of different experiences and representing lots of different organizations. We also had on that committee Omar Lopez, our trustee, who's the longest standing member from the board, because this particular working committee had the mayor on it as well as a trustee, and Omar was the trustee. Now as mayor, beginning on the 1st of the year, I took over in that role. So there's always been two of us on the working with the working committee. After the presentation, we're going to turn it over to Trustee Lopez as our longest standing member of this particular committee, but I don't want to devalue the work of the rest of the board. At many, many times and through many, many of our own meetings, we have been updated either individually by members of the working committee, by Matrix, and by each other about what is happening with police reform. We've gotten feedback, and we will continue to get more feedback on the February 24th from the police chief, who's also on this committee. The PBA will also like to share some of their thoughts now that a draft plan has been submitted. The process is that at the end of the draft plan, after we get input from community members, we will then look through all of the comments from both community members, like today's engagement, as well as from the working committee. We will look at all those recommendations, and then we will put together a final copy that will be signed off and voted on by the board and signed off, and that will be sent to the governor's office, along with some additional recommendation, which we feel, I don't know if other communities are doing this, every municipality is different, but we have also committed to putting an addendum to some of our fellow electeds in county and state and federal with recommendation made by the working committee and by some members of the public about some improvements they feel should be made to make policing better in our community in Ossining, but really is out of the purview of local electeds such as ourselves. Everyone will get a chance to speak. This is scheduled for 90 minutes, but we've seen it in the past that we will go longer if we have to. The goal here is that this is a listening session. Every single person that wants to speak should raise their hand. You'll be brought on to talk to us and share with us your experiences with the police, your recommendation for better policing. Any commentary is welcome. The only rule is that while there's no limit when you speak, there will be others that want to speak. They'll be called on. We will go through the whole list of everybody that wants to speak before we start again with people who want to speak a second or third time, et cetera, because the goal here is to hear as wide a scope of our community as possible. I am going to look for 1 minute to see if anybody on the panelist tell me that I forgot to say something before I'm looking. I'm stalling for a minute, but I'm going to turn it to Richard
Mayor,
Brady.
I'm sorry, Mayor, if I may, I just got a text message from
Bob Fricci.
Okay.
He's actually unfortunately not able to join us today.
Okay.
I guess the power,
Yeah.
he doesn't have any power right now. So,
Yeah. I didn't have power till like, I think 8 minutes before I got on today.
so
So I lost a lot of power this morning. Okay. So he's unable to do it. Thank you for letting us know, Trustee Casada. Richard Brady, I think, and Matrix, I think you are on.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'm Richard Brady. I am the president of Matrix Consulting Group, and I was the project manager on this assignment. And I work closely with the working committee and the public through these various input sessions throughout the process. I'm going to share my screen. We have put together a brief PowerPoint, which isn't going to eat too much into the time of the input that we hope to get from the community, but we thought it would be good to frame the discussion. So, as the mayor mentioned, this whole process began last year in the wake of the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, other killings that happened in police incidents. And the governor's office issued Executive Order 203, which ordered every local community in the state to develop a plan to look at, address, and reform policing in every community throughout the state. So Austining began this process in the summertime last summer, late summer, and created a working committee, which was comprised of local residents, which met several times before we were hired, and of course met with us several times after we were hired, to develop suggested recommendations that ended up being within the draft report, which is now public and is the basis for these review meetings that we're having. As part of this process, a lot of things happened that involved the working committee and the public. Because the breadth of the reform initiatives were so broad, we broke the working committee down into 4 subcommittees that were created to increase the focus on specific reform areas: governance and oversight, policies and procedures, operational kinds of issues, hiring and training. Throughout this process, we had a number of community listening sessions. We had one-on-one interviews with, I think, over 40 people within the community. We had 6 community meetings, some general ones and some focused ones. And we also had an online survey, which had between 800 and 900 responses. In fact, they're still coming in. So we developed the draft report with our working committee. And in these public meetings, the village board is receiving input so that we can finalize the report, and eventually they can submit the recommendations that they wish to implement to the state as part of its 203 reporting process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of my presentation. So what I'd like to do is talk in a high-level way about the suggested recommendations that came out of the process. This isn't all of them, but I consider them many of the major ones and some of the all-encompassing ones that came about as part of that. The first area is importantly in the governance and oversight area, and that's important because it frames everything else. It frames everything associated with oversight and accountability, but also policies, the operations of the department, et cetera. We've recommended that, first of all, in the oversight area, that the representation of CPCRB be changed. It's extraordinarily unusual to have police representation on a Citizens Police Complaint Review Board, and it challenges their ability to be independent and objective. So we've recommended that a board of 5 civilians with 1 alternate be the CPCRB in the future, and entirely with civilian non-police representatives on the board. They should consider hiring an outside investigator on their own or in conjunction with other communities in Westchester County to review complaint cases so that they have an independent basis upon which to review complaints against the police department, police officers specifically. On the governance side, we've recommended the creation of a new board, and it's recognizing that the village board has as their responsibilities police commissioners, many things that are their responsibility, and that this is important enough to provide special focus. And this is something that is increasingly being considered throughout the state of New York and across the country. So we've recommended something that will take a different kind of process after this is done, that would change the village charter and the Westchester County Police Act to create a new police board of commissioner that provides more general oversight of police policies and operations, and that board make regular reports to the public, to the village board, and that the police department work with the commission to develop those metrics and reporting mechanism. The oversight and governance bleeds over into the policies through transparency. And the working committee has made a number of suggested recommendations to increase transparency, including making all of the policies online so that the public can review them, and that there be a public process for periodically reviewing and changing them as necessary. But other transparency changes are recommended in the report, such as making it easier for people to contact not just the chief, but other senior officers within the police department. There are a number of recommendations to address bias in policies. And this is important because many policies are old and it needs to be looked at from this lens. There are a couple of recommendations regarding ICE, and one is the policy and the second one is the communication of the policy. On the policy, there's the perception of cooperation between the police department and ICE. And we have recommended within the report that the department modify its general order so that the police department won't respond unless they're called to that location, and should not be visible unless there's a substantial risk that they could be called on. In internal operations, the working committee and the subcommittee we work with specifically on this has recommended that the village and the department and the region look more carefully at alternative response. Police officers, even if they receive special training, and they should receive more of that, are often ill-equipped to handle mental health calls or calls involving homelessness and the special needs associated with that, substance abuse, et cetera. And many of those three things are common in a single call. And so a growing area in New York and across the country, and already exists to some limited extent in Westchester County, is developing an alternative response unit that would provide assistance on the response, but would also be involved in case management with individuals so that they're focused into programs and services in the county. This is something to be very difficult for the village to do on its own, just because of its size and the cost of such a thing. So we've recommended that they look at it more regionally, either in conjunction with Westchester County or with your immediate neighbors. Regardless of whether that can be implemented, the officers should receive what's called CIT training, crisis intervention training, which is a 40-hour training. As a pilot or as a starter, there should be at least one person per shift trained in that, but with an ultimate goal of training everybody within the police department at that important level. Some communities in the state, including some in your region, have created a voluntary response registry. Yonkers did this, in which the police department and dispatch as a first effort are pre-notified of what could be a situation within a household, such as a special needs or a mentally challenged individual who could, so it would be registered so that they would know what they were going into and know how to respond with that in mind, rather than without that knowledge. And in many cases around the country, this has resulted in unfortunate deaths and injuries to individuals. There are a number of things that came out of our committee relating to improving existing community policing efforts that involve going beyond the chief, who represents the department very well in community events, to include most police officers having assignments as liaisons with special community groups, having different kinds of presence within Austining schools and different kinds of events throughout the community as well, and different kinds of roles. The second set of recommendations relating to ICE, relating to whatever that new policy is, there needs to be a public awareness campaign in both English and Spanish to explain what that role is, because there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknown about what the police department's role is, and this needs to be clarified in a public and transparent way. Officers need support too. This is a challenging business, one of the most stressful occupations in the world, and police officers need support through a mental health program, and many communities have adopted a special counseling options. Some of them are at periodic times, others are after specific incidents, other are upon request. Teletherapy is now an option given technology now that provides the opportunity for an officer to seek help without going to a special room or making an appointment somewhere that's more visible, and that's been helpful for officers who need to seek help. Many departments have also implemented a formal early intervention program so that they're using information associated with complaints, with leaves and absences and things like that to intervene with a counseling effort. On hiring and training, there are some suggested recommendations within the report to increase diversity in hiring and promotions, but also to make it more local and to start early in Austining High School to have a program to introduce high school students to policing in the police department and specifically, and so that we've got a department that is more representative of the community in the future and actually has a stake in the community. We have recommended a multi-year training program over a 5-year period that includes more emphasis on training relating to bias and racism, de-escalation techniques, procedural justice, cultural competency, how to handle protests, as well as the crisis intervention training that I mentioned before. So that in a nutshell, I think we had 32 groups of recommendations in the draft report, and that's about 3/4 of them there. The report has been public for several weeks now, and so hopefully the people who are on this review call have had a chance to take a look at it. We'll get your input now. So we've had one meeting in the past. We've got this meeting today. We've got one in Spanish next weekend, and that plus other forms of communication. We've received emails, we've received voicemails at our office, and all of these things will be used to finalize the report, and we will submit that to the village board in early March. They will review it throughout March and then submit their recommended action plan to the state by April 1st. So that's the process, our principal recommendations, and where the process goes from here. Omar, do you have anything to add to that or transition to the input?
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to everyone in the community joining us. We have a lot of folks, nearly 60 people that's in addition to the panelists that we have. So really happy to see this level of engagement. I think there are 2 points that I would make in addition to what you said, Richard. Number one, in terms of context, this was a presentation that you and Matrix made to the board at the end of January that recapped the work that had been done from the beginning of this engagement up to then. We've been receiving a lot of feedback, and the second point is that feedback from the point when this presentation was made at the end of January through all of February and the very beginning of March, we're taking all of that feedback into consideration as we're working on the final version of this draft recommendation. So everything that is recommended today, everything that was recommended at the first public engagement session and that will be next week, and everything that has come in through email and phone calls, conversations with us, we're all compiling that information and taking all of it into account when revising the existing draft from the end of January. So with that, Jamie, if you can please start, I'm gonna just open it up now for folks to raise their hand. If you go to, people have different devices, and so it may look a little bit different depending on kind of where you are. But a lot of times in the participant list, or sometimes below on the very bottom of the taskbar, there's an option for you to raise your hand. Raising your hand is going to be how we have folks participate today. There are a few ways for you to participate. You can raise your hand and use your voice in order to ask a question. You can also write a question into the Q&A. The way that we are going to be prioritizing questions is first, folks that are raising their hand to ask their question, and then we're going to be periodically going into questions in the Q&A. And we're going to be doing that for about 90 minutes, like the mayor said, extending longer if there is more engagement to be had after that. So it looks like we don't have any hands raised yet. So I'm just going to give it a minute.
Before you do, Omar, do we mind if Richard stops his sharing of his screen so that our faces are all there? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Richard.
So if Dana, if you'd like to go first before someone raises their hands, there are some questions in the Q&A.
Rob Abbott of the Ossining NAACP asks, in their response to Executive Order 203, some jurisdictions in New York have created a mechanism for community input into police hiring and promotion decisions. Were such mechanisms considered by the working group?
I think I
Thank
could
you,
answer that.
Dana. Thank you, Rob. So I'm going to hand it to Richard.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Omar. Not specifically all promotions. So certainly we looked at a process with the committee of increasing community input on hiring, and also for the selection of police chiefs, but not all promotional opportunities. But that's certainly something that we could certainly add, because the model is there in the other suggested recommendations. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Diana Lemon has a suggestion. She comments, when promoting this forum, please post the hyperlink. It makes it that much easier for the community to participate.
Good suggestion. Thank you. Next question.
Acacia Moriello has a question. Good morning. I'm a Black Village resident of 4 years. I mentioned this in a previous meeting, but just wanted to reiterate the importance reforming the CPCRB to only include civilians, not police officers. I have only ever had appropriate, respectful interactions with the OPD, and I'm sure the majority of officers are excellent. However, it is important that people who may have had negative experiences with the police to feel they can come forward and have their complaints reviewed impartially. From a civilian perspective, this seems like low-hanging fruit and an easy recommendation to implement that would go a long way toward improving the perception of fairness. If it is not, I would appreciate if someone can explain why it isn't. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have Richard start, and then I'm going to chime in afterward. Richard, if you can start here.
Well, it's simple. We thought that this was a really important starting point in the recommendations for the process, to have an independent and civilian review process for complaints. So, but that's one of the core recommendations in the report.
Definitely. Thank you. Agreed.
Last question that I have so far is from Leah Nelson. When will the final new draft be available?
After these meetings, after the Spanish speaking input session next Saturday, the process goes rather rapidly. We have the listening session next Saturday. We've had the input throughout this month. We are required to get a revised draft of the report to the board on March the 5th. So which is the end of the first week of March. So we will make the revisions. We're starting them now and through next week, and finalize them once we receive the input today, the input next week, and the input next Saturday, and get those to our working committee as soon as possible and meet with them next week before this is given to the board, because we need their input on the final draft as well, and then submit it to the board on the 5th. So that's the process. And then Omar, do you want to talk about the process after the 5th?
Sure. So what happens after the 5th is that the board is going to be reviewing that draft, and the board is not just going to accept or not accept the entire report as a whole. What we're doing is going recommendation by recommendation and discussing them. In order for a recommendation to make it into the final draft, what we'd agreed on is having 3 trustees or 2 trustees and the mayor agree to it, and then it would make it to the final recommendation. That's consistent with the way that we have had other similar processes, and would allow for difference of opinion within the board. So we're going to be actually starting those conversations with the initial draft that we have, and that's happening during the next work session on Wednesday. And ultimately, what we're aiming for is having the work session on March 10th. So like you said, Richard, the working committee will get together on Wednesday, March 3rd. Then you'll send the report to the village board on March 5th on a Friday. Then on March 10th is when we have the following work session. We're going to be making the final edits and adjustments that we're recommending. Then ultimately it will go to the legislative session on March 17th, and that's when we would vote on it. So the public would have an opportunity, certainly before March 3rd, when that final draft gets put in, to have their feedback included in that final draft, and then they're able to react to what is the final draft that we're passing during the legislative session on March 17th.
Okay, just thank you, Omar. Dana White just lost her. I think there's some electricity problems going on because Dana just lost the connection, so we can jump in with the Q&A.
Well, actually, we have a person that has their hand raised right now, so
Fabulous.
I'm actually that person over. Patricia, I'm going to bring you over. When we do that, if you can please tell us your relationship to Ossining as you begin. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patricia Hayes. I'm a resident of Ossining, and I have a couple of questions. I wasn't aware that this was actually that we were going to be reviewing the draft today. I wasn't clear on that with the information that I saw, so it would have been a little bit more helpful. I found that throughout the process, the information that is on, especially like the Facebook, which I don't even have. When I look, I have to actively try to look at stuff from other people because I don't use social media. And so I have been looking to see what, more detailed information. Had I known, I would have looked up the drafts. I don't feel, even though I'm happy that Matrix reviewed it, because then I was like, oh, I got a lot of information and I appreciated that information. I would have been more prepared to ask the questions and so you're giving us this information, but you gotta kind of have to process it because, I would like a little bit more information about the boards. It all sounds good, but I'm a little, one recommendation about the police where they said that there was a community committee and how it has the police officers on it. I also would like to know or would recommend to, how do you choose the committee, the community members? Because throughout this process, there's a lot of people that wanted to be involved in the board for the executive order. And, that was unclear in the beginning. So I think there's, at least for me, how do you select the people that are on the board? How long are in that community board, not the board of trustees, but the policing board? And how long, like you have to think about how long do they stay and things of those details are, I don't know, will they be presented in another meeting? Is that part of the draft? That's just the question that I have. Also for the policies and procedures, again, one of the things that I didn't know it would have been nice when we had these community calls to kind of have some guidance about what we were looking for. You know, when you ask a general question about policing, for myself, you know, I've don't have anything specific, but if you ask about how do you know a moving violation or just general interaction, specific things that you could say, oh yeah, that's happened to me, when I don't know what's wrong if I don't know the policy or procedure. You know, like sometimes I feel that we don't ask the right questions to the community, and then that you don't get the right answer because it was so generalized that we couldn't say you know, anything specific. I've had pretty much, you know, good experience with the police, but I also would love to have more transparency, and I can't say that something went wrong because I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's my feedback or not.
It seems like the feedback may be on your side, Patricia, but I was able to get all of your questions. I believe there were 3 of them. If I can quickly recap: 1, about communication with respect to this meeting, social media versus other ways of communicating. 2 is the terms for folks that are serving on the police commission, the new board that is recommended in the report. And then 3rd is knowing what it is that you're reacting to, asking for more context there. Is that right?
Yeah, just more, yes, more or less. I definitely would like a little bit more information to be prepared for the call a little bit better.
Okay.
Especially, it's really exciting to see that we're going to have the policies and procedures available, but some people don't know how to look through that stuff, how to navigate it. Again, just putting the information in there or just saying we have a board doesn't really make it sounds good on paper, but to really have an impact on the community, how can we use those policies? How could we get that information out to the community? Because to me, I had a hard time. And again, I didn't know that this was a call to review the draft that was already in place. I would have been a little bit more prepared in reviewing it myself.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I'll try to answer those questions in line. So
Okay.
first is respect communication. So we certainly did post on the various social media channels that you mentioned. But actually, one place where I would point you toward, because I also have my misgivings with social media, is our website. The very talented Jamie on our team does a wonderful job coming out with a blast every Thursday that has information on what's going on in the community. So if you go to villageofossining.org, you'll be able to see exactly how to sign up. And actually, we can connect you with Jamie to get signed up for that newsletter because that has a really comprehensive overview of everything that's happening, including this initiative. In addition, we have the mayor's message, which comes out on Tuesdays. And Mayor Levin has been speaking about this as well in those messages. So the benefit of that is that it engages folks via email that are not involved with social media. The disadvantage is that if you're not engaged with technology in general, then you may not be plugged in, right? So we're also having conversations about ways to engage with either older people or people that don't have access to technology so that they also have the ability to know what's going on. But your point is well received there. In terms of the committee terms, because this is a suggested committee, there isn't a fully fleshed out all those details aren't fully fleshed out. I'm going to turn to Richard, if you can speak to if that has been part of the conversation at all.
It has, and there actually are some specific recommendations, suggested recommendations within the report. So as it relates both to the CPCRB and the Police Commission, we've described a process like other boards and commissions where names are brought forward to the village board and the mayor for consideration, and they go through a review process and are named. We've also outlined a process of staggered terms so that each of these oversight boards and mechanisms aren't having a complete turnover every 2 to 4 years. So they would be staggered. On the policies, I think you pretty much answered this as well as Patricia in her question. So I think it's in the details. I mean, yes, It is best practice, and this report has recommendations relating to putting policies online. But your question is a good one because that can be implemented in different ways. You can make a PDF of all of the 150 some policies and throw them up online. And it would be difficult for somebody who goes through policies all the time, as we do, to be able to sort through that. So fortunately, this is a change that is being implemented across the country. And there are firms out there who would help organize the online presence for the policy so it's easy to navigate through, so that they're type by type. There can be annotations and explanations to them, and it's clickable so that you're not scrolling through 3,000 pages to get to what you want, and makes it a lot easier to find the context that you're referring to.
Can I chime in here, Patricia? I think one of your comments that started with, I'm sorry, and this is Rika Levin speaking, is about what you knew and didn't know coming to this meeting. So I really appreciate that. Let me be a little bit clearer. It is our intention, it's actually written in the executive order, that once a draft is put together, that the public engagement occurs. That's part of what was put out there. But from our perspective, this is not just about commenting on the draft. That in and of itself would be helpful because it would allow us to say, oh, okay, we have a whole bunch of people that looked at it this way and a bunch of people looked at it that way. And that helps us be informed as representatives of the public.
I love them all.
Somebody needs to mute. I'm sorry. The other piece though, Patricia, is you're not limited to simply discussing the plan. That was not the intention here. If you have a specific request, whether you read the plan or not, if you have a request that is specific to the Ossining Police that you would like to share with us, it could be something that has happened. It could be something that you would like improved upon. It might be a question. This is public engagement. But without a plan, we'd be having, that's what we've done with the focus groups and all that. But we're not limited to the plan. The plan allows us to get public input to something that we're going to be looking at, but we're all taking notes. And if there's some recommendation, because we're going to go to every single person, I want to at least give you the chance that if you had an idea coming here today that you wanted to hear about what's going on, but you also had ideas of ways going forward, because none of us can go backwards. So going forward that we should know about, that you want to bring to our attention as we look at this, about the police, please do share that with us. And if you don't think about it right now, you could go into the Q&A and say, look, I want you to consider this idea. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. That's good. I think that helps, clarify for a lot of people also that are on the call. I don't know if other people have their hands raised. I did have a couple more things, but if other people have their hands raised, I can come back to it later.
Would you be okay to put it into the Q&A, those couple of things? Because we'll be interjecting every 10 minutes or so and going through them. Or do you want to hold your
more
place
of a
till later?
talker. Yeah,
No, I totally get that. So am I. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'm a talker.
You've got the chair right now, so it's up to you whether you want to say it. I mean,
I do want to say it. It was
okay,
just, again, it's more going forward with the executive board and understanding that it's meant to, even though, to help the Black community, right? The issue is with the Black community, the Black men, and the Black community is about 15% in Ossining. And I'm just wanted to make sure or ask the question, how can you engage that community when it's not the majority? What steps are being taken to make sure that that community is being represented and that every voice is heard? Because I know the people on the board, there is diversity and there's a lot of people, but I don't feel that everyone has been engaged, especially the young kids, the high school kids. And, it's hard to engage them. We've tried, as a mom, I have a teenage son, and I see the disengagement in general. And I would be, one of my recommendations were, and I see that they mentioned the high school, but not just to engage them as police officers, but just to engage them in community in the boards, and look to them for recommendations and suggestions, because they have been impacted, and the everyday people in the community that are not necessarily coming to the meetings, and that are not necessarily, I got a really good flyer in the mail about a seminar about energy saving. I haven't got anything. I'm gonna join that Zoom meeting too, but you know, that I didn't get anything for this. And this is such an important, you know, executive order. This is like a really once in a lifetime chance to make change. And I don't really know, again, me not being the social media person, were there flyers out? How are you engaging that specific community when it's such a low percentage? And going forward, I think it would benefit. I think there should be more engagement personally.
Thank you, Patricia. So I'm going to quickly answer your question because there's a lot that we could get into. But I also see that we have a couple of other hands raised and some more questions in the chat. So if there is a specific part of the question that you wanted to engage with more, I'd love for you to raise your hand again so that we can circle back to you. So during this engagement, we have the working committee and the board thought a lot about how do we engage as much of the community as possible, particularly the voices that are not historically engaged and the ones that are most affected by the police. And so we talked about certainly the Black community, like you mentioned, the youth, but also LGBTQ plus people in our community, senior citizens, folks that are in the Spanish speaking community, but also folks that range in terms of their documentation status. We were trying to be as thoughtful as possible about giving a comprehensive way of engaging people. And this is happening during a pandemic while also trying to do engagement for many other initiatives. And so I would say there's more that we can do there. Every time that we do this, there's more that we learn about how to improve with our public engagement. And we recognize that this is not a one and done, but part of an ongoing process. And so we're going to have the Youth Bureau coming out later this year. That's a way to engage the youth. We have a number of initiatives that are happening through our Parks and Recreation Department. That's certainly another way to engage the youth. And with respect to law enforcement specifically, I know that the chief who's coming to our meeting on Wednesday to speak to the plan will speak to the ways that the police department has engaged with the community themselves. But that's kind of general engagement. With respect to this plan, know that we have made a concerted effort to reach out to the Black community and all the others that I mentioned. And I'm happy to see that so many folks have not only come out today, but have come out throughout the process to give their thoughts and opinions.
I would
Okay.
like to quickly interject. I'm sorry, because Patricia, what you're asking, I think also frames, you're helping us also frame the rest of the next hour. And I'm sorry, I'm going to interject, Omar, and I know that there are a lot of other people, but what she's talking about is what Patricia's talking is really important. So to answer your question, we have a dozen boards. We are one of the few communities in the county of Westchester. Until last year, we're the only community that's had a civilian police review board, to be honest with you. They're appointed positions. Anyone, however, from the community, they're all listed on the website. We are actually looking all the time for people who want to be engaged. There are a couple of year commitment. There's some training involved, etc. So you're your friend. As far as the youth, I know it's not quite the youth you had in mind, but Omar already went through the youth, but honestly, most of these committees, 18 years of age and older. So looking for people to be involved in that. So I hope that that helps with some of that. And we have had separate conversation, not matrix, although Richard was involved in a couple regarding with Black men, as you had stated. Omar and I actually sat for a couple of hours with a group of Ossining Black men on a Saturday, exactly like this, and it actually was recorded because we do record our meetings when asked, and that was asked for, is that, and most of them, except for one, I think, have lived here all of their life, to hear from them directly and in a more intimate setting. That came from a member of the working committee's request for us to do that, and we were happy to do it within days. So there has been things, not everyone wants everything that they say and do to be out there. Some people like to have a little bit more of a one-to-one. So I just wanted to interject with that, and we're going to move on to the next one. Thank you, though, Patricia. And please continue with emails to us or however you want to communicate with us. Thanks, Omar.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mayor. I am going to, Patricia, I'm going to put you back into the attendee list now. The next person to speak is Jennifer Cabrera. I'm going to bring you over now so that you're prepared. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And also, I know who you are, but if you can give your relationship to Ossining, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So I'm a resident of Ossining. I'm also on the working committee, and I'm chair of the CPCRB. So I actually had a few responses to some of the questions that Patricia had. So number one, I did want to clarify about the terms of those committees that she was asking about. The CPCRB terms right now, those are 2 years. We're not asking to change that at all. So everybody who's on it is on for 2 years. We have talked about staggering those terms because right now we have a CPCRB that's almost entirely brand new people. Our longest serving member started in 2019. So pretty much everyone else, it started in 2020, and that's been hard. So that's one thing. The governance, like Board of Commissioners that we are proposing, we actually talked about those terms being 3 years long. We wanted to have a little bit of tenure on those boards just for continuance purposes, so that whenever the Board of Trustees turns over, those folks are still around and have some historical knowledge that they can help with working with the Board of Trustees. I also wanted to mention that we actually talked about 2 different models for that, and both of those models are suggested in the plan. Basically, the people who were on the committee, we all of us had pros and cons to these 2 different types of governance. We could not decide which one was better. So we wanted to let the public decide, or, make their comments on it. So one possible model would be just like our other volunteer boards. The Board of Trustees selects the people who are going to be on that board and appoints them. Another model, which would take much longer to implement, would be to have those as elected positions. That is a lot of work. We don't even fully know how what it would take to implement that, but that was something that we were thinking, because it's such an important position. Maybe it's something that makes more sense to be an elected body, just like our school board and our Board of Trustees. So that's those 2 boards. I also wanted to mention, with regard to communications, on the working committee, and I don't know that Mayor Levin necessarily has a lot of information about this because this was before she was mayor. But when we first started meeting, we put together a communications and engagement subcommittee, and we came up with a lot of proposals about how to make sure that people knew about this entire process. Part of that did involve sending out stuff in the mail, because we know that not everybody has internet access. Not everybody's comfortable with communicating over the internet, even if they do have access. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to reach people whatever way they communicate. We also had ideas about doing robocalls as well. And frankly, I'm very disappointed about this, and this is something that we have brought to the Board of Trustees as something that we were not happy about. But those recommendations didn't really get reviewed. We thought that they would come up in meetings, and they didn't. And so that's why you haven't seen any mailers about this process.
Thank you, Jennifer, for those comments and for your leadership on both of those boards. Really appreciate that. As a quick response to the mailers question, because it is also one that Diana Lemon asked in the chat. So this is an ongoing conversation that the board has been having, not only with respect to the Police Reform and Reinvention Commission, but many of its other priorities. When we have, let's say, like the DPW site going, that the process is going on near the waterfront, people saying, well, how can you have this big project and no one knows about it through a mailer, or the parking diet that we're doing. There's a variety of the comprehensive plan that just passed, a variety of things. And so we've been having conversations about what is the kind of cadence and structure that makes the most sense. And some of the things that we're weighing are, there's certainly an economic question of it is not inexpensive to send out that many mailers. And so wanting to be conscious about using taxpayer dollars in a way that's going to be.
Actually, if I can just interrupt, we didn't have that conversation. That's
Right.
what I'm
So,
saying. It may have been the case, but we were not told that, and we didn't have a conversation even with the entire committee. So I
Yeah.
want to be really clear that those recommendations that we made were not discussed.
Right. So I totally receive that. And as the representative of the Board of Trustees on the working committee, I'll take responsibility for that. That was my fault for not closing the loop in the conversation that we started with the Board of Trustees, and then bringing that back over to one of our working committee meetings. That is totally on me. And so I'm sorry for having dropped the ball there. The priority remains, because we still need to get the word out to folks for ongoing priorities that we have in the village. And so while we weren't able to do it this time, I know that we recognize the importance of getting the word out, and whether it's mailers or something else like that, what the best way of doing that is something that we're keenly aware of and want to be thoughtful about. Okay. Jamie, kicking it to you for the next person.
No problem. Jennifer, I'm going to bring you back over to the attendee list, and I am going to bring over Leah, and then once Leah, you're finished, we're going to have Trustee White begin reading the Q&A, because I think we have 13 questions in there. Okay, so and then once that Dana White begins the Q&A, if there's anyone else that wants to ask questions, please leave your hands up, and then the order in which you have come in is the order in which I will call on you. So the system automatically sorts it by the order in which you've raised your hand. Okay, so we're going to do that now. Oh, it doesn't look like that person still has their hand up. The only person, oh, Leah, there you are. Okay, I'm going to bring you over. Thank you. Leah, if you can unmute yourself, please, and tell the group your relationship to Ossining before you begin. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Leah Nelson. I am a member of a local house of faith, as well as the Ossining NAACP. I emailed Matrix this recommendation, and I've spoke about it before, but I just want to reiterate it at this meeting because I think it's really important. I think what you guys have done thus far is really great. I think oversight is great, and diversity in hiring is great, and alternatives to police response is great. However, I don't think policy and training is enough to change police culture. That building trust and a feeling of safety in the community for everyone is contingent upon police being held accountable for their own misconduct. I want to make sure that nothing like George Floyd ever happens again. The Ossining police contract is now on the village website. On page 16, under indemnification, the paragraph explains that currently the police will not be held financially responsible in findings of police misconduct, and that the village is financially responsible, and that's your taxpayers' money. This clause needs to change. Make the police financially responsible in findings of police misconduct. This will change bad behavior. Accountability changes like this one are starting to happen in this country. Westchester County has proposed it. Colorado passed it. New Mexico and Vermont are working on it. Police contracts are negotiable, and it appears that Ossinings's has expired and perhaps can be renegotiated. But I think Mayor Levin and the Board of Trustees would have to be on board with a change like this. Please consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. I appreciate you bringing forward that really detailed recommendation. We certainly will be including it as part of our consideration for this plan. Thank you. Jamie?
So I have, thank you very much, Leah. So if you would like Trustee White to begin to read, do you want to pick maybe 5 questions that obviously in the order which they came in, et cetera, in the Q&A, and then the next person that we will bring over when you're done with that first set of questions is going to be Mr. Jermaine Smith. Okay, so thank you.
Okay, first, Diana Lemon had a comment. Thank you, Jennifer, for the transparency. Virginia Stillman has a question. Will the public be able to ask to be considered for these 2 boards? Or will the mayor or board of trustees select people they know or think would be suitable? So the 2 boards, I guess, are the Civilian Review Board. This question was asked a few minutes ago, so I want to make sure we capture the context again.
Okay, I think I can take a first crack at this. So by our village charter, which is the document that lays out all of the laws and policies for our village, boards and commissions like this are by mayor appointee. So by our charter, which is like our constitution here in the village, we follow that. And so the mayor would be making that decision unless we were to change the charter to reflect a difference in one of the boards. So that is why it is structured in that way.
And if I
Okay.
can add, this is Richard here, that specifically relating to the proposed police commission, that would require a charter change, so the process could be created and defined at that time.
Thank you.
If I can just piggyback on that one that Omar said, usually for the civilian review complaint portion of that, what has happened in the past is we usually get letters of interest from members in the community. And there's an interview process that goes through, and usually is the mayor and 1 trustee additional to that as well. After reviewing, usually is attached with a resume, and after reviewing some of that stuff, they actually come in front of the village board, excuse me, as a recommendation. And we kind of go over all that process in there. And that usually that's what happens with all the appointees that are made by either the mayor or the board itself. So there's another, obviously we're not talking about any other committee or any other assumption in that one, but there's other portions where the village manager appoints the persons of that one. But I think right now we're very specific on this particular board for the Civilian Police Review Board. That's the process that we have always done it. And I'm assuming that be very similar to if I'm going forward with that, even with the, with the recommendations, usually for the police officers that are part of this board, that comes from a recommendation of the police chief, and it goes in front of us, and then we either say yes or no, and then we kind of go from there. But if it's something that I'm missing, I'm gonna look at Stuart. Did I miss anything in regards to that? Did we miss anything, how that process is? If you could please just clarify that. Thank you.
You did not miss anything. It is an appointee. The board has been involved with that appointment when we have made appointments in the past. I would just need to double check if there's a specific reference under the Civil Police Complaint Review Board as to whether that's a board appointment. Trustee Lopez is correct that where there is no specific reference in the code It is a mayoral appointment, but ordinarily that has been the mayor with basically upon recommendation or follow up with the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Manny, for following up there. The one only other thing that I would add is to the 65 people that are currently in this meeting, in addition to the 10 panelists, what I would love for you to do is go to villageofossining.org. The very talented Jamie Hoffman has ensured that at the very top of the webpage, there's an image with a bunch of hands and it says get involved. If you were to click on that, it brings you over to a webpage that shows you what all the different ways that you can get involved are, including with the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board. And that is a way for you to submit an application and your interest throughout the year if there are any openings, but certainly there are towards the end of the calendar year is when we typically start to make appointments for vacancies that are left. So that is a way for you to get involved so that it's not just who the mayor knows or who the trustees know. That's a way for the community to indicate their interest in getting involved. Dana?
Allison McKenney has a couple of questions. She asks, are there plans to provide training in alternatives to deadly force in handling incidents? Policies are all very good, but when a stressful situation occurs, people, including officers, tend to react as they are trained to reflexively react, rather than thinking through what the departmental policies are.
I want to have Richard start here. I think the one thing that I would say before Richard starts is that all of the trainings that our police department go through are evaluated every year. The police chief is the one who makes the recommendation in terms of what those trainings should be. And often there are a core number of trainings that police officers go through, but there's a rotation as well because it's reflective of what the current needs are and so forth. And so when it comes to deadly force, I know that that's something that's really important. Richard, if you could speak a little bit about what the current training for that looks like.
There is training on de-escalation techniques, and we've recommended additional training and more frequent updates to de-escalation techniques. So that's the principal one that came out in the process.
Thank you, Richard. Dana?
And then Allison's other question is, are there plans to improve background checks for hiring to avoid inadvertently hiring officers who have been a problem elsewhere, and how possible is this?
I think I could jump in on that. Yeah, the background check, we all know there's background checks. And if there's anything in their file or record that there's been a problems, it's seen. If it's not in there, we can't see it if there's no history of it. So that's a double-edged sword, so to speak. So, but everybody's checked, even on new hires, they have to go through a psychiatric interview. So it's pretty intense. It's pretty thorough. So, but as far as if it's not in their file, who could find it? That's the only thing I could say to that.
If I can add to that, so the police department's background check process is quite thorough, and I think somebody asked another question about this. It involves not just records, but also review of social media postings and things like that, and those are increasingly common practices in background checks in the community. But it's not just file reviews; it's also interviews. It's thorough in that way too, in terms of speaking with former employers and neighbors and people like that, family members, etc.
Thank you. Dana, let's take one more from the chat and then we'll bring it to Jamie.
Marianne Cerisi asks, can you provide in more details what you have learned regarding best justice-focused practices regarding the interaction between local police enforcement and ICE agents? Also, can you provide more detail about your specific recommendations in the report about how Ossining Police Department would interact in circumstances when ICE is expected in the community?
First of all, ICE is never expected. You don't know when they're coming. They don't have to notify you. Fortunately, I guess here in Ossining, they do notify them, which leads into a whole other conversation with the observing of what's going on. So the interaction with the local police, you know, again, they're sent to observe. They don't escort, they don't get involved unless, God forbid, something happens. So hopefully that answered your question, but like, again, they're never expected. They can come and go anytime they want. They could put an officer on every corner. We wouldn't know it. You know, it's a federal group, so we have no control with that.
If I can add to that, the board member is completely right that ICE is under no obligation to notify the local entity that they are going to be there. Best practice, however, which is part of the question, is exactly what we've recommended in this draft report. And that is that there is no cooperation unless you're specifically called by ICE or by a community member. So I think the issue is the perception relating to what I would term being on standby just in case. The perception is that if you are visibly at the scene and you have not been called, but you've been pre-alerted that you're going to be present, as the board member mentioned, there is the perception of cooperation, if not the real cooperation on an incident. So best practice is that they are not there and there's no policy about being on standby because usually you don't know they're going to be there.
And with a quick interjection, that recommendation is in front of the board. The board is collecting information. We just, as a group, haven't decided yet in which direction we're going because we're still collecting input from the community. That's what we are as a board, is where that enters into the plan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Bob. Jamie, if you can bring on our next speaker.
Absolutely. Jermaine Smith, I'm going to bring you over. While I think some people know your relationship to Austin, it would be helpful if you were to also explain who you are and your relationship as well. I'm going to bring you over now, and if you can unmute, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Am I on? How you guys doing?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I had to pick someone from the airport, so I couldn't really see what's going on the screen. So my name is Jermaine Smith, a longtime resident of Ossining, work in higher education IT, and I have 2 community organizations, and I'm just an advocate and a youth development coach, and we do projects and stuff in Ossining. A couple things I want to address. One, just for the record, that I totally disagree with this webinar format for this community meeting. I can see where it's helpful in Board of Trustees meetings where your time is limited and you have a specific agenda and community comments are isolated to like a last portion of that. But the level of engagement that's needed for police reform, this environment is not conducive to getting people to be inclusive in this conversation. Community can't see familiar faces, and you guys control who's talking, who's the narrative, and we don't know if someone's missing, if there's a comment missing. Not saying that you're doing something malicious, but it just doesn't build a sense of trust and transparency between the village and the community at large. Speaking to a couple things, one thing that Mayor Levin addresses that she said in the executive order, it said that comments are sought out once a draft is completed, once the draft is out. In actuality, this process is different. So the executive order mandated that municipalities included community stakeholders and identified a couple different categories for that. So those comments and questions and to the draft were preceding the draft coming out, including the draft with the working committee and community stakeholders. And then by law, with anything that you're issuing, any laws or anything that's mandated out, you have to have public feedback before it's ratified and voted on. So this process was supposed to be more engaging from the start by the doctrine of the executive order, the letter sent, as well as the resources guide that was sent to all municipalities. So it should have been more engaging. And I think one of the things that is evident in a lot of these conversations is you guys are hearing comments, but you're not listening to what people are saying. Because it's been several times where in all calls, and I was on that call that the mayor was talking about with the Black men in the community, And I appreciate it. Omar was on that call. I believe was on that call as well, and Richard, and a couple other ones. So we've had conversations engaging, and throughout this process, what was made evident was the intent of the executive order. It was written in a way that expressed that there was implicit bias and inequities predominantly happen to the Black and African American community. And throughout this process, we hear constant and ongoing feedback. And even with the presentation from Richard of Matrix, there was a lot of comments about ICE and addressing the special needs and intervention training and all that stuff. And there was one sentence about bias training. There was nothing about use of force policy. And there was nothing about accountability discussed in that presentation. And I think to address the inequities and things that happen in policing and all the racial injustices, those two things have to be present. You have to have policy to stipulate what's acceptable, and then you have to hold people accountable when they violate those policies. If you don't have those two in place, then you can't hold officers accountable because they're doing what they think is necessary to thwart a threat or to reduce a situation. If we had policies and we had, again, we can go back to training, but I don't think that really affects the real sense of what's happening, because we have training across the country and racist bias training, but we still have these incidents that are happening. So we can do the training to set a baseline, but we have to have policies and we have to have accountability. That's the only way you're going to get these things to change. There was mention about the communications and the Community Police Review Board. So the review board came out of tragedy, and you guys can speak to history of that. It wasn't like Ossining just arbitrarily said, let's start this review board proactively and do that. It became an issue. Community was outraged, and then this review board was created out of that issue. So while we did have this review board where no one else did, we also had some incidents that no other communities have. So when we speak about what we have and try to compare to other communities, we have had a person murdered by the police officer in Ossining. We've had protests here, and that was just one of the incidents. And again, people going to say, oh, it was so long ago. One is too many. So if we had one here and we've had to react to that, that's a different process than if we were proactive and did this ahead of time, at which this process is trying to do. And we seem to be trying to do everything we can to not be part of the actual solution. We talked about communications, but the website but this call wasn't updated till yesterday. We talked about the mayor's message, and I appreciate her putting that message out, and thank you for that. But not trying to make that piece a negative. She did a great job of putting the message out, but in the message it just says to encourage to read. I think speaking to Patty's point earlier and to some of the other points is that if we had just a little bit more clarification in that this is going to be a community discussion about police reform, but we'd also like to hear feedback about the executive order and the draft that we submitted to the community. Here's a link. So go beyond encourage to read and actually be proactive and tell them we would like to hear your feedback to this executive order. And then we talked about de-escalation, again, talking about this, but there's a difference in de-escalation and use of force policies. So you can be trained to de-escalate, and that's a different than, are you allowed to shoot at someone when they're driving away? Are you allowed to shoot at someone who is unarmed? Are you allowed to use your taser certain times? And there's gray area and ambiguity, and the legal ramification of that, the village council has to go through the lines and the code and everything and look at that. So I just wanted to make that point. And a couple things speaking to the draft. One, I think you guys should address the timeline speaking, because at best it makes the village look like it's inept, because it says that this process started in summer of last year, but then it jumps into October. So it looks like it was like months of inactivity. So I think you should address that and put in there that, we started this process in the summer. It was brought to our attention that we had to have a working committee, and then we revamped the process and started over and put something there to address that, because there's a gap there that's not being addressed in the draft. So it either looks like you're hiding something, that there's this level of mistrust there, or that the village is inept and it took them hours to put together a working committee. Another thing that was a concern, or I think you guys should address just for the optics, is that you said the final meeting for the high school kids was January 19th, but then within the draft, you says between January 6th and January 13th, the board and subcommittees met, and that reform put together this report and this process. So it made it look like this draft was put together without the input of the high school students. So I think you should just address that, maybe change the wording of that in the draft. just to make it, I know you guys are including conversations, but just the dates look like they're off because it says between January 6th and January 13th on page 3, but then on the previous page, it says that high school engagement meeting was on January 19th. Another piece that I wanted to address, one was on, I think it was on page 11, where we spoke, there was a comment made about, try to find it real quick. I'm sorry, I thought I had it here. Again, I'm in the car, so I'm trying to trying to have everything ready, but it's a little bit crazy. I think it was on page 11. One, we keep tying immigrants to the Latin community only. So it says with immigrant Latin community that, you know, we have to have members. I think we have to separate the conversation from Spanish speaking and immigrant, because we have immigrants from Poland, from Ireland, from Jamaica, from different places in the world. So we have to stop tying immigrants to only Spanish speaking communities, because there's immigrants from all over. So we have to, that's one thing we have to change. And also there's a place in here, and I can't remember exactly where it was, where we address and say we have, we're filled, so many students, especially students of color and students with special needs. And then you put examples of that and you put disabilities and LGBTQ. And that's equating special needs to the LGBT community. That has to be changed immediately as well. I believe that if you listen to some of the people on the working committee and made these draft edits before this was out to the community, that could have probably been rectified immediately. And I don't want to go too much, but just, I'm going to send some requests for actual policies, but I think one thing that I think we have to start looking at a procedural justice model here in Ossining. And I think that changes the dynamic of how we engage. And I think a lot of people understand and know that we don't have a problem right now with policing in Ossining. A lot of us have a good relationship with policing, but we did have an incident here. We already had an example of that happening here. We had an example, of that happening in local communities. But this is a proactive process. We're trying to prevent it from happening again here. We're trying to be ahead of the curve. And I think a lot of things that we're talking about is leaning towards that. So I think we have to start addressing and stop looking at it as a us versus them and start looking at it as like, we want to be part of the solution, and how can we help police do their job better and more safely, not only for them, but for the community. And the last thing I think, you know, again, I have a bunch of them, but I'm going to send them in an email. But I think looking at an early intervention system that is designed to identify offenders that may have some kind of problems or performance issues or something going on with their lives personally. Police officers, it's a stressful job. It can be as intense, not just with them personally because of their job, but things going on in personal life. COVID is very stressful and high intense. They're on the front lines. A lot of this stuff affects them. So I think if we can have some kind of early identifying system that can identify those officers that have issues, I think that will be helpful. So I'll shut up for now, and I'll just send some of the recommendations in email. But again, I think that the village would be suited best not to have these webinar formats for this type of engagement. I think it better suits them for the Board of Trustees meetings. I think this should have been a more open, engaging community platform as opposed to this webinar format. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Jermaine. Thank you for your detailed recommendations, and thank you for your engagement throughout this process from the very beginning. You've been someone that has been really, really engaged and has pushed us to be doing the best work that we can. So thank you for that. I'm going to respond in kind of chunks to what you spoke about. So I receive your feedback about disagreeing with the webinar format. Message received there. I would put Ossining's community engagement with respect to this process up against any community in this state. I think that we've gone above and beyond what most municipalities have done, including municipalities of our size or larger, but certainly ones that are of our size. We have done a lot. Now, that's not to say that we've done it all or we've done the best. I'm sure there are others that have done more than we have and have done it better, and there's more that we can do. But I'm really proud of the engagement, both in the putting together of this draft, and since it's come out, I think that we've done more than most, and would push us to do even more. The following set of recommendations that you made about having more accountability for our policies with respect to the CPCRB, all the way down the line, I've noted them. They are in the record, and you said you'll be sending an email that details them as well. Know that we're going to have a transcript of this entire Zoom call made available to us. And so it'll be available in detail then, in addition to the email that you sent, and that we have received it. We hear what you're saying, and we're going to be taking all of that into account. Those kinds of detailed recommendations make a big difference when we're considering which ones to advance or not. So thank you very much, Jermaine. I really appreciate your engagement. Your thoughts. You're unmuted.
Yeah, and so I definitely appreciate that. And again, I know we're doing a lot, but I think we have to do our best as a community and not compare ourselves to other communities. I think one of the things that we hear constantly is that perfect is the enemy of good, and that's well said, and you know, that's a great catchline. But what happens is that then good enough is enemy of doing our best, and we're not doing our best in this process. We haven't been inclusive. So again, we have a diverse, I'm going to say, committee, but when you look at the committee, there's a lot of the same faces as people that represent organizations, as 3 clergymen. The Black men on the communities, one's a police officer, one's a clergyman, and then who else is on and then Kendall Buchanan was brought on the 11th hour after pushback, and he's been brought on as a co-representative of the NAACP and as a community at large. And then we have people on the working committee that have not attended meeting, have asked for attendance for the meetings. So you have people who quote unquote speak for the community, and the community, and I'm not sure if we can get a record of the attendance of who've been part of that process. So you've had the opportunity to add people who wanted to be engaged, but then people were added that, and not by any fault, as life goes on and people have things to do and they be busy and maybe have personal issues that are coming up. So I'm not trying to fault them for not being able to be engaged, but when you have someone who's absent for a long period of time, or people who can't show up because of their job or whatever it is, then what happens is you're losing that diversity of thought, and then you're not including other people that could have engaged in that time, in that process. And then also, I mean, you know, I'll leave it to that. I'll leave it open to other people. So, you know, we're going to further engage in that. I just think we had the opportunity to include more Black men from the community, especially young men from the community, as part of this process. Anytime we have any other conversation, if this was a process about women in coding, we would not include men, as many as men on this call, and exclude that community. So, you know, it looks good on paper, and when we talk about these things in a vacuum, but when people actually see, if we look at who's on the working committee and see what they represent as far as organizations and different positions, as opposed to people at large, if you look at the guide and the resource guide that was sent out by the state, they even said, get people on the working committee that was incarcerated, that have high interactions with police, speaking to the community at large and not to elected officials or selected representatives or, you know, equity task force members. And I work with everyone, a majority of people on the board of the working committee. I think they're fantastic. I think they should have been included in conversation, as we said 1,000 times. I just think it should have been other people included in that conversation as well. But again, I appreciate we're doing more than other communities, but that's not really a high bar. If you look at some of the work that's going on for the working committee, there's a lot of complaints going on across the state. So, you know, I think we should establish what that bar is, and we should be the litmus on how this process is going, and not looking to the other communities and what they're doing when we have a more diverse community than a lot of others. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jermaine. The one thing that I would respond to is, because you said a lot, and I appreciate your feedback, is with respect to representation on the working committee. So this is a point of tension that has existed from the inception of the creation of the working committee. And I'll speak for myself. I'm not speaking for the board or anyone else, but having been a part of that process from the very beginning, one of the things that we were considering when putting together the working committee is this is a complex issue of the community's engagement with law enforcement. And how do you put together a group of people that are going to be able to get together on some sort of regular basis, and while they themselves will have experiences with law enforcement, are also connected to wider communities that can talk about all the difference in experience? Because the reality is that I, as an individual, only know my own experience, and having representation on the board that reflects our community really matters. And race and ethnicity, these are not clear-cut things. So you take me as an example. I am Afro-Latino. I identify as Black. As I walk around Ossining, I am phenotypically Black. Okay, so when I walk around, people in the community widely don't see me as Hispanic or Latinx. They see me as Black. And the way that I know that is because when I go into many Spanish-speaking establishments, they speak to me in English. And when there are other people ahead of me or behind me that may look phenotypically Latinx or Hispanic, they speak to them in Spanish. And I am Dominican. I speak Spanish fluently. But that's just my experience. The same with the police. When I encounter the police may or may not know that I'm Dominican. I present as Black, and that is my experience. And when you were naming who was on the board and who was Black, you did not name me. Now that's because, you know, you may not consider me Black or whatever. I'm not saying that you do or don't, but it's also not unusual. People don't look at me always from the Black community and go, oh, he's one of ours. So I'm kind of a man between lands. I'm neither fully Hispanic or Latinx, but not fully accepted there, nor am I fully accepted in the Black community as one of theirs. And so that's my experience. So what is my engagement with law enforcement? How am I represented on the board? I only bring up my example as an example of one to say whether we bring in young people or people that have lived in Ossining for generations, people that are biracial or people that may identify as Black but present as something else, it's very, very tricky. And to say that these 3 or 4 or 5 or 50 people, if we had 50 Black men on the committee, would they represent the Black male experience of law enforcement in Ossining? I would say no, because it's individualized. It depends, but there are themes that come up. There are things that we know that are patterns, not just one-offs. And we're trying to identify those patterns so that we can address them in policy. And that's what this is all about. Because there may be one-off interactions if a police officer is having a bad day, if a citizen's having a bad day, whatever it is. But how can we improve the relationship between the community and the police? How can we improve that through policy? And so I appreciate, Jermaine, your engagement. And as we continue to work on this together, hope that you continue to stay engaged, because I find your voice to be one that is very important. Jamie, if you can bring us to the next one.
Just one point of clarification.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, Jermaine.
You are elected official, so I just want to make sure as a point of clarification. What I did say is that the representation on the board is of groups and organizations. So you as an elected official have a different level of engagement with police officers than a person off the streets in the village of Ossining. The Pastor Jones has a different relationship with police than a person off the streets in the village of Ossining. Ben Irvin, who's a police officer, has a different level of engagement with police officers than people off the street in the village of Ossining. And then again, we've talked about this in length, and so when we paint these narratives of being inclusive and saying that you identify as Black, that's all well and good, but I did not mention you because you are an elected official. You are an oversight of the police department. They know who you are. So when we talk about a level of engagement with the Ossining Police Department, I can't count a board of trustee member as having a level of engagement the same as a high school kid or myself. Even myself, like I have a different level of engagement because I'm known in the community. But if we have people, but I've also interact with the youth. I'm a youth coach. I work on the Westchester County. I'm a volunteer for Westchester Youth Board. So if you're talking about who can you have on the board, like I asked to be part of this process from the beginning, and I represent a larger demographic than probably majority of the people on the board. So, you know, when we say, oh, we could have, and we always do the what if-isms and possibilities, but this was the one time that the village has and a mandate the opportunity to include the Black men in the community at large. It was evident there's names identified in the executive order. It said predominantly Black and African-American men in the executive order, and then we still excluded the community and decided to go with the usual suspects, the same names that we always see the boards. And Omar, I think me and you have a great relationship. I think you're great for the community. I appreciate you and the rest of the board members. What I'm saying is that we had the opportunity to do more. We're not doing our best. We're doing good, but we're not doing our best is what I'm saying. So I'll leave it at that, and then you can take me out and back to the general forum. But thank you guys, and we'll engage more, Omar. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jermaine. Appreciate you too, brother.
All right. Thank you, Jermaine. I'm going to move you back over. Thank you for your comments. Okay, so the next person I'm bringing over, and if I'm saying this wrong or if it's an acronym or what have you, I have BREND AK. So Brendak, I'm going to bring you over. I'd like you to please give your relationship to Ossining. And then after you speak, the person at 827-560-704 will be brought over, and then Roe. Okay, so hang tight as I bring you over. And again, your relationship to Ossining, please. So please unmute. Brendak.
Yeah.
Thank
you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Jerry Smith. My email is just Brenda Smith. So I don't want to
Sorry
get her.
about that.
I don't want to get her in trouble. I just want to go over some of the stuff that we mentioned earlier. By the way, Jermaine Smith is my son, so I don't want nobody to think that kind of conspiracy to get both of us on. But I lived in the village of Ossining for over 50 years. I was there when the Chris Malone thing took place. I was the president of NAACP. We participated and negotiated the police review board. At that time, we had some of the same issues that you're looking at now, and we also had the same recommendations of similar recommendations that you're doing now, and we still having these same problems. So I'm thinking that, to my end, I'm very confrontational because I like to state what I believe. So I'm not going. This is not towards any of the board members or anybody else that's participated, but I believe this is business as usual. Usually, when a Black person is killed, we have all these issues with police not being trained, or well, maybe they misunderstood this people as being psychic and they didn't know that, so this is an excuse. And we always minimize the issues that we need to deal with. Governor issued this executive order for a specific reason. He stated, because of the murder of this guy, and because of the 100 years of constant murder of Black people, we need to do something about it. It appears that we are minimizing that because now every time I'm listening, we're talking about general police behavior and attitude toward the community. You know, this government man, because the general behavior of police officer is a concern. He was mad because we constantly have reason that Black people are killed for no cause. We're constantly having this on. We have kids walking down the street, oh, we thought he had a gun. This is not something that every other resident is facing in this country. It's been consistent for 300 or 400 years. Black people's lives hasn't mattered. Now we're having this reinvention thing, a reform thing, where we're discussing issues and saying, okay, we got what you said, but now this is a good time for us to reform our police department and talk about all the issues. I am very open and loving of everybody, but sometimes you have to address the issue before you. And before us is the issue of Black people being murdered just without cause. That's what was put before the government. That's what the government said. Because of this. And I say, when they say because of this, this is the intent. This is why I'm writing this law. Because for years, Black people, Black young men, old men, and people of color are being murdered, and they're finding that it's been unjustly. So when he put this order out saying that we need accountability, I don't think he was talking about let's have accountability about how you are promoting. Or let's have tranquility in how we treating police officers for misconduct. Those are things that goes in the personnel file. I understand the police chief to do because he's the supervisor. But what we're talking about, how do we stop people who, for no reason, believe that they can kill Black people without being held accountable? That's the accountability I think he's talking about. And he issued the order pursuant to the demonstration that's what they were saying. Black Lives Matter was not saying that, oh, police not, when they come in our community, they need to know how to talk to us. We need to know how to behave to keep them getting killed. They're saying we're tired of it. It's been happening for years and years. And the only way we're going to resolve it, to have accountability. I've looked over most of the municipalities' police reform, and I have none of them that have accountability for police murder. How do we solve that? I think that we solve it by looking at something that the board has missed. When I look at the order, it has two parts. It has police police reform and police reinvention. It's my argument that he was directing two different agencies to do two different things. Police reform, he could require that any police that enforce laws in my state is going to be trained up to code because I'm the chief enforcement officer. I don't believe he had the right to decide to say to you as the village board, you need to make laws to hold these people accountable for murder. I don't think he said that, but he could say, let's reinvent. I can force you to reinvent by saying to you, if you don't reinvent, we're going to take your money. And that reinvention would call, to me, I think that means that you can go in and enact local law saying that any police officer that is employed by the village of Ossining who commits a crime, a criminal act, or who is alleged to commit a criminal act of murder is immediately suspended without pay until the investigation is over. Doesn't take governmental legislation, it's within your jurisdiction, and it takes the personal accountability away. You also could say, well, indemnification for everything. But you don't indemnify people who commit criminal acts. I think Donald Trump don't like to get that done. We can't do that. It doesn't work. You have to have the rule of law. When I was in the NAACP, we had to go up with the village and keep people's job that was accused of cursing out a resident or doing something that we didn't like. Jobs gone. Police officers are not exposed to that. They can go out and commit acts, and we say, well, because they're police officers, we have to indemnify. I think that could be changed. Okay. The other thing is this, I don't want to go too further. I think that the matrix and the village should research why did they have police reform and police reinvention, and not without reinvention having a part. I think the reinvention was a directive to the municipalities to enact laws to give personal accountability for people who commit crimes. I keep hearing about police officer misconduct. I haven't heard anything in this form about people who commit murder. What do you do about a person who commit murder? This ain't about the police officer we got knowing how good the police officer is. I have police officers friends, but I've also had police officers come in and try to get me to do crime. So this ain't about everyday police. It's about people who's on the police force that commit murder. And they murder people, and just so happen, it's people, black men and black boys. We don't have white people getting shot by accident and murdered. It doesn't happen. These are the same police officers with the same training. Let's not be afraid to look at the facts. The fact is that this law, the intent of this order was to make sure that we get a way to stop the murder of black men. It wasn't there to say, well, we need to look at ISIS or we need to look at other things. Those are issues that matter to me and to everybody. But it appears that every time we need legislation for black men, it becomes some other general platform and it's taken away. It's crazy to me to have a law that was written, and in the law it says the stakeholders should be involved in the very beginning, that you don't have black people involved in creating the process. Because I don't care what nobody say, I grew up in a racist part of the country. I'm a Southern guy. I come from North Carolina where racism was a norm. It was easy for a police officer to come up and kill you and nobody goes to jail. That was in the 50s and 60s. It shouldn't be that way in 2020. We gotta stop believing and creating different platforms that doesn't solve the problem. It's nice to have all these committees and we got all these people talking about what happened, but nobody can tell me how I felt when I seen somebody get hung. And they go home to their family and they laugh. They say, yeah, he deserved it. I ain't worried about it. And until we say to this country, we don't care what color person is, if you commit murder, you're gonna be punished. And I don't hear that here. I hear us talking about police training and upgrading 20th century policing. Like I said, when Chris Malone got killed in the village, We had all these things, same thing you're talking about. It's nothing different. And it's strange that every time this happens, we hire, and no offense to Matrix, we hire companies that go in and do police training consultation that deals with, okay, this is how you can upgrade the police department to get more money or whatever it is. But we haven't had anybody go in and come up with, we need to solve the solution by holding people who commit crime accountable. So I'm just wondering, is it possible that you can look at both ends of that reform? One, I think, is directed toward the police chief, which he has control of. And you can't have police reform where it's internal accountability. You can't have it. You can't have it when Village of Ossining and all the municipalities hide behind union contracts and all this stuff to say it's nothing we can do. It can do it. You can write laws saying that any contract made with the village is void when it's a criminal act involved or whatever. You lose your protection. Those are things that the village board can write. They don't send it to the state and let the state approve it, but you have that right. We don't look to be doing that. So everybody can, you can talk about all these things we need to do to twist and formulate the stuff that you have, but none of that is dealing with the basic intent of that law, which is to stop the murder of Black men, unjust murder. I'm not saying that they're saying stop all murder, because some murders are justified. But we have many times, and like I said, I lived it. I don't have to read in the book what happened. I done been threatened by police. I've almost been killed by police just because I had a nice looking car. I've been threatened by the police to be put in jail for years if I didn't do something. So it's something that Black men face that's particular to Black. And you can be on all the groups, and we have support from everybody. And I love that. But you ask a question, how is the water in your house? How is the bath water? You don't want to know that because you don't want to take a bath there. Sometimes you got to ask the people who are directly affected by it to get in and give you input so that you can create the process. I think what the Village of Ossining is doing is it says they created the process and then we're going to let you give some input in it and then we'll accept it or not. I met with Mayor Garrity the first time before all this started with the NAACP brothers. They hadn't even told us that they had created a plan. And we went in there and told them, listen, we're the stakeholders in this thing. We want to be involved with it. So it's not that we came in late and now we want to change it. We tried to get in early and we were denied. So I would hope that you will look at that, the two things that they looked at, reinvention, and tell me, why would they put reinvention in that if it didn't have a purpose? I know people tell me, well, reinvention, that's just a name. No, when stuff is in, it's a reason for that. So see if that's the way that you can get input to how we can have municipalities do their part in this police reinvention. Don't put everything on the chief because the chief is going to do with policy and stuff like that. Accountability has to come from you, and you have to be willing to enact laws that's going to hold criminal murder or murderers accountable.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. I really appreciate your comments and you laying out the history and your experience. We're going to be considering all of that now as we move forward with the plan. So thank you very much for your comments. Jamie, if you can bring on the next person, please.
Absolutely, trustee. Okay. I'm going to take you out, Mr. Smith, put you back into the attendee list, and then I am bringing over 827-560-704, and then Roe, I will be bringing you over after that, and then Althea Goodson, and then Patricia again, which we did invite her to come back after other comments. So I believe with Patricia, if other comments come in, we may come back to you after, since you did already have an opportunity, but I'll let Trustee Lopez make that decision. Okay, so 827, you're coming over now. Please introduce yourself and give your relationship to the Village of Ossining. Thank you so much. Also, I ask that you unmute, please. You're here. 8 to 7. I'll give you another minute. All righty. Okay, so 8 to 7, you might have stepped away. If you want, I won't put your hand down, but I'm going to move you back over for the sake of time and bring Ro over. Thank you. Okay, Ro, you are coming on over. If you can also introduce yourself and give your relationship to Ossining, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Ro, if you can unmute, please. Thank you, Ro. I see you.
Thank you, Jamie.
No problem, sir.
Hi, my name is Ro Moran. I am a village member. I was also a part of the working committee. I think it's no secret that I haven't been impressed with this process. I really haven't enjoyed being a part of the committee because I felt that it really lacked communication, transparency, and clarity, which I think is something that we keep on hearing a lot. I think that one thing that's incredibly important to understand and to process, and I think that this should have been on the village to really put out there, and I don't think that they have, is the same thing that Jermaine said earlier, which is the fact that this process isn't to punish our police department, right? This process isn't to hold them accountable for things they've done. Yes, we've had, unfortunate cases of police violence in the past, but right now, I love our police department. I like our police chief, and I like everything that they're doing. I think they're doing good work, but we really want to be able to set up a process that is going to prevent any tragedies like the ones that we've seen in the past occur. So that's what the working committee really set out to do. But I feel that that bomb should have been diffused, that this process is completely preventive. This process is just to ensure that, Black men, Black women, brown men, brown women, especially Black men and women, can go down the streets and feel completely safe, because right now they don't feel safe. And it's not because our police department is a faulty one. It's not because they're out to get people, but it's just because, unfortunately, that's the way that people see police departments across the country. Because many of the people, like Mr. Smith just said, many of the people have unfortunately been victims of police violence in the back, and that in the past, and that creates some sort of trauma. Yes, this process should have included more Black men from the beginning. Omar, you weren't included in that because you are the police's boss, right? As one of the commissioners there, it's a very different story. It's a lot of the people like Kendall, like Jermaine, like Mr. Smith that should have been there and sharing their stories about what happened, so that people can take notice and people understand why this is important. I also want to say that when I mentioned the lack of clarity, lack of communication, lack of process, the timelines that as a committee we were giving were never quite clear. I know I can be slow sometimes, but I don't think it's just me feeling this. I think it's our whole committee that has felt this at some point. And we were always working against a very, very difficult timeline. And then I felt like this, because the lack of communication and clarity was always exacerbated. And that made it difficult. So we did, there was the draft that went out that's available on the website. That's not a draft that we were able to look at. And before it went out, that draft, as hard work and as great as Richard has been and Matrix has been in this process, I don't believe that draft in and of itself is completely anti-racist, which is what this policy was. Just everything that should be here should be anti-racist. And I don't feel that we do a good enough job putting that out there. We weren't able to look at a lot of the policies. We weren't able to look at the PBA contract. We weren't able to look at a lot of things before that draft went out, which is the reason why the committee has been continuing to work even after we were, told that our tenure in this committee was over. We have continued to meet and work together and go through this. And we did draft another version of the draft that we feel is a little bit inclusive to what we were trying to say and what we thought. those included a lot of feedback that we had from Jermaine and a lot of the Black men that we talked to and that you talked to. It also includes a lot of the language that we had from meeting with young persons and high school students and everything. So it does include, for example, indemnity and talking about indemnity and the fact that, you know, a lot of police departments across the country, like Ms. Leah said earlier, a lot of these police departments are tackling indemnity in a way that if someone is found guilty, then they have to pay back all the money that, you know, legal counsel and everything that they recovered. You know, that is something, because that holds people accountable. It also talks about a lot of people that don't, a lot of kids, especially, that don't really understand the role of the SRO officers in their police department, in their schools. And, you know, they actually don't feel comfortable and don't feel that there should be an SRO in the schools. And it's just a lot more anti-racist language, and not only anti-racist language, but a lot more intersectional language, because there is an intersectionality that comes here as well. You know, one of the big contentious things that has been talked about a lot is ICE. You know, what's the role of ICE in the police? You know, one thing that's incredibly important to notice is that Black immigrants are more prone to be attacked. And yes, I use the word attacked, to use the word attack, to be attacked by ICE than other populations. You know, if you have, you know, Black Hondurans suffer more at the hands of ICE than, you know, other Hondurans. And that's important. So there's an intersectionality that is very important here in the language. And we wanted to make sure that that was noted. So I do urge, yes, I do urge the board to, and I asked you this, and I did hear from Mayor Levin that you are looking at the draft that we sent out and including that in your thoughts and everything. I think this should be shared with the community. I think it should be something that's available to be out there and something, but I think that people should look at this and also see this is the other language, because that's transparency. I think that's what people need to see, because a lot of the things that have mentioned, we tried to tackle in that draft. We, in the committee, we joined this process because we feel incredibly passionate about this project, because we have been affected by this, or we love someone that has been affected by this, and we just really care about this. And the process has been really frustrating. And the village should be helping us create this process and make it easier and make it safer and make it more inclusive and make sure that we are tackling things that we're setting out to tackle. And I don't feel like that's happening right now. So I do urge that this other version, that this things that we mentioned, especially when it comes to indemnity, SRO, etc., that should be included out with the community, because it's very important. And it's really the words that we were trying to put forth as community members, as volunteers in your municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ro. Appreciate your thoughts there. I have two things that I would say, and then I'll also open it up if anyone else from the board wants to react to that. But so one actually piece of housekeeping before I get to my comments. So it's 11:53. We have 3 people now with their hands raised. And I know that we're aiming to end this at around noon. So what I'd like to do is to, let's try 827 one more time to see if they are around. Let's go to House Lady after that, because Patricia did get a chance to speak. And then Dana, if you can choose 1 or 2 comments from the Q&A to wrap up with, and then we'll do our closing remarks. So Ro,
sorry.
Yeah. So, Ro, the 2 things. One, the version of the report that you and the rest of the folks from the working committee, because it was a subsection of the working committee that sent this kind of edited version. Yes, we definitely are engaging with it as a board, or we're looking at every single one of those recommendations. I got on the phone with Jennifer Cabrera recently to go through them in detail as well, to understand from her perspective, her understanding of what you all were thinking with each one of these. Also recognizing the fact that there were 18 people on the working committee, and this represents the edits of a subsection of those. And so we don't want to send unclear messaging to the community that the version that you all sent is the new working committee drafts version of it, because
then let's be clear, Omar, that also when we talk about that, the other people that weren't present were the district attorney and other councils that never came to the meetings, and other police officers that also were probably not the most excited to be part of this process. So let's also be clear that that's what happened here. The people that did help with the draft of this were community members who weren't also either somebody that held a position of a position, police officers, or legal representatives that never showed up.
Yes, I totally receive that. So, and I think that's part of when we're talking about who should be on committees like this. Part of it is not just what do they look like, what do they identify as, but also will they be engaged? Because we need folks to be engaged in the process, not just to be there on paper. But the larger point is that know that the substance of what you are writing is going to be engaged with the board, whether or not we end up posting it on the website, for example, or something like that. Know that the substance of it is going to be engaged with by the board as we're making these various recommendations. So that's number one. And number two is with respect to the lack of clarity around timelines and process and all of that. I want to make something very, very clear. The buck stops with me. I am the person on the board that has been from the beginning involved in this process. And if there's anybody that is responsible for lack of clarity around timelines or process, it is my fault. Now, I am part of a team. There are many other people that have been involved with this. But ultimately, if you feel like there wasn't a clear sense of what should have been going on, that should have been on me to learn. I can do better when I know better. And now that I know better, this being month 2 of year 2 of my job here as a trustee, know that any other time that I'm working on any other engagement, whether it's we just finished a lot of the comprehensive plan, we have the parking diet coming up, whatever it is, I want to make it super clear what the process and timeline for these things look like, because now I see what happens when we don't. The people on the working committee get frustrated, the community gets frustrated. It's super, super important early on to have a really clear process map for exactly what's going to happen, who's going to do it, when it's going to happen. And so know that the lesson has been learned, the message has been received. I'm sorry that you've had the experience that you have, and know that I, as a leader, will work for that not to be repeated again. Those are the 2 comments. I'll now open it up to the rest of the board if they wanted to say something. I believe that Mayor Levin, you are on as a panelist, if you wanted to unmute yourself and say something.
Thanks. I lost it there for a while, so I appreciate it. And I have to drive at this moment, but I think I'm clear and you can hear me. You raise your hand if you can. So number 1, this is a first for really everybody. This is an unusual executive order. It is not something that anybody had a great experience in. And because the trustees are often described before, it seemed to us, and we may be the only ministry that went this way, but I think it was the right way. It seemed to us that hiring consultants is a third party that has expertise with police matters. And we put an RFP out, so that was the first month to gather that information, would allow the committee to have total reign, total freedom without any boundaries. Not being driven by trustees, because I could imagine a world in which we would be sitting today and people say, well, you know, you guys ran this and your village staff ran everything, and it was your attorney that worked on it. And so really this plan isn't really a public work. It's really been yours all along. So we have to balance, and I would do it all over again, by the way. We have to balance giving absolutely no boundaries to a committee of volunteers that would come back to the 2 board members and say, listen, these 5 people are never showing up, or they're barely showing up, or they're derailing us, etc., and anything else that they would have done. But it's the first for all of us, not just the members who sit on this working committee. It's not that we haven't had working committees, folks. Some of you have sat on the downtown one, and you sit on one of the dozen boards that we have and we appoint. That's not really the issue. The issue is that there was totally, no boundaries with a purpose. And that purpose is not to create a path for people, but let them find their own path and come to us and say, this is what's important to us. This is what we want you to focus on. These are the things we want done. In retrospect, with 2020 hindsight, there were a couple of things, right? And we're hearing them loud and clear today. The frustrations, certainly for me, didn't become clear till last month. Maybe we should have had more milestones in the process. Maybe if it weren't really the first executive order of its kind, and probably who knows how long, we would have been more experienced in it. Having added all that up, I got to tell you, I do sit on 2 other communities. One, a large city like New Rochelle, and have been tuning into their equivalent of this, which are doing very differently, and also to Peekskill a couple of times, which also is being done quite differently to get a sense of what's out there. Not to Jermaine's point, and he's right, like we set our own bar, but to have some sort of a sense of what's out there. That's all. It's a sense of what are others doing. I spoke to mayors from both of those communities, again, one being very large and one being more our size, both highly diverse communities, to get a sense, are we on the right track? Honestly, Ro, I hear your frustration. You wrote me an email. I tried my best to answer them all. I hear that you want it to be better, but the reality is the plan that you all put together is with the updates. I don't even think they're revisions. I think you added a few more things. Those are updates. Is actually really, in my humble opinion, a really great job in a very limited time. And it's a very, very short time period for all involved. Some communities did a single survey, a couple hundred people responded, communities larger than ours, that was it, they're done. We went deeper because we're interested. Secondly, I want to point out, so I'm sorry about the feeling about the process, but somehow you produced a great product, in my opinion, with some very serious issues that go well beyond the village issues. They go deep into issues that are really on a national scale. And I mean that in a very positive way. That I think that's a good thing and something for us to think about. I stated that in the beginning, that we're taking some of those that are outside of our jurisdiction and we'll take it to the people whose jurisdiction it is within. One great example, which has not been discussed, is, for example, an idea came out of this that we should be talking to the police academy and bringing recommendations to how they're doing their training. I would have myself never thought of it, but it came out of committee work. And it may not be a big bullet on the presentation that we saw earlier, but for me, it's one of the big statements. And I think we can influence that. That's like a big idea, and that's an important idea, and it's a long, sustainable idea over time. So I think that's something to consider. I'm not relitigating whether it was exactly the right 18 people. It's never exactly the right people. And any committee we appoint, we get feedback. You know, this person never shows up. This person does all the work. You should have never appointed this person. Why is this? You know, we just get better at it the more we serve, but it's never exactly what everybody thinks it should be. It's really hard to represent everybody on these time-limited. And I also, on a personal note, Omar, I appreciate you taking the brunt of commentary that I personally think is just coming from a place of great passion. And that to me is what frustration is. Everybody in the committee just wanted to do more, but the entire board was involved in it. Most of us, except for Dana White, were on the board last year when the mayor made her appointments. You know, we're all in this together. We actually all live in this community, and our intention is nothing short of wanting to do the best that we can. And I think that's recognized. We want to include the police. We want to include all of our neighbors. We want to include our own knowledge of what is happening. So I don't think that, Omar, you need to take the hit. I think that everybody here has the right intention And this is not a one-time shot. It's not legislation that the governor passed. That's not the kind of executive order this is. In fact, he can't pass any of this. It's all done at the local municipality level. And we are going to put a plan together. We're going to share it. We're discussing it this week. We're going to discuss it the week after that. All these meetings are publicly viewable. They're all recorded. And I hope to come up with a great plan. And by the way, that plan will go on April 1st. And on April 2nd, we're going to start again and say, where are we going to go and what do we need to do going forward? It's iterative. It's not a once and done deal. I just wanted to add that I consider the board a team. So that's sort of my final word on that. And I appreciate the work being done here today as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Jamie?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to give, let me just do one thing here. Okay. So I am going to put 827560 back in, and then the Hasliby, I'm so sorry. I'm not very good at pronouncing names. So you're coming back over 827. We'll give you about a couple beats to unmute yourself. And then if not, we'll go back into our queue. Thank you. 827, if you can please unmute and tell us your relationship with Ossining.
Is this a call for Linda?
I'm sorry.
I don't know who you're trying to reach. I had my hand raised. My name is Linda Levine.
Yes, Linda, you're listed as 827-560-704.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So Linda, you're in. You're ready to go. Just tell us your relationship to Ossining. And
Thank you.
All right, thank you. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Robin, I'll call you back, okay? Hi, I have been going over all of the recommendations. I'm very interested in this process. I had been on earlier. I am concerned with, as others have, with actually looking at accountability and cultural issues regarding the regarding police reform. As far as the recommendations go, I'm interested in knowing if there is a criteria that's going to be used for passing forward those recommendations that can be passed easily. There are many that I'm interested in, but I believe that they are going to involve approval by the PBA or by state law, such as the holding police responsible rather than municipalities, giving civilian review boards subpoena power, and making a change of having only civilians on the civilian civilian reform committee. I wondered if you could briefly respond to that. I also want the community to know that many of these recommendations for accountability are not handled at a municipal level, and for the sake of transparency, they need to know what the community can pass and what is going to need action outside the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. So this actually goes back to something that the mayor mentioned at the very beginning of our time together today, which was that there are some recommendations that are outside of the jurisdiction of the village, but that nonetheless the village trustees may feel like are important for the state to know that the community has proposed, and so we'd want to let those different, whether it's county or state or federal, to know what it is that those recommendations are. So we're going to be including an addendum at the end of this report that has a set of recommendations that are in addition to the ones that the village will be moving forward, that are both for ones that are outside of the jurisdiction of the village, but also recommendations that that maybe the village board at this point doesn't feel like it's ready to pass. It doesn't have 3 trustees or 2 trustees and the mayor in support of it yet, but will be included as an addendum for future boards to be able to consider.
Omar, if I could mention, I think it would be, just to get ahead of this, it would be a positive thing to let the community know what will, rather than as an addendum, because I think some of these issues for police accountability are so demanded, that you let the community know upfront that they will need to go outside the municipality. So they're not waiting for you to do something, or they know that it is going to be handled outside the municipality, rather than they're thinking it's something that, you know, the community is demanding, but it's not something that you can take care of, just so that they know that and are not wondering, well, how come, you know, we can't put together an alternate intervention team, or how come we can't change how the civilian review board is put together. I think that
Linda,
I'm sorry.
we're going to be doing that.
Okay.
That will be part of what we put out there. We will
Okay.
put the affirmations, we will put the declinations, we will say, this is a phenomenal idea, just not within our purview.
Okay.
It goes to a state level, it's done at this level, it's done at that level, so that people do have an understanding that there are things we think are good ideas, we just can't vote on them. That's not
Okay,
within our
that's
to
great.
your point, exactly 100%.
I just know that these are things that sound like they're important to you, and I don't want them to be buried. I would like them just to be out front. That's all I'm saying.
Can Matrix make a quick comment here about this? Because I think it relates to the
Please.
what we do with the draft report in finalizing it. In taking all of this input that we received in the public meetings and the other forms of input we've had, including the great work that people have done in actually revising the report, one of the major improvement areas that we need to make as part of this is more implementation guidance. Now, certainly this process does not stop when you submit the report to the state on April 1st. The implementation process is going to go on for an extensive period depending upon the recommendations, and because this is really a starting point for the whole thing. But one of the things that we need to do is describe what that implementation process is going to look like in general, as well as for specific recommendations. Some of these things are going to be easy and short term if you accept them. Some of them are going to be difficult and long term, and will take other processes to implement. For example, as has been brought up, collective bargaining agreement, potential changes to New York state law, interlocal agreements with other entities. So this needs to be spelled out in terms of the degree of difficulty and the external processes that need to be put forward. But again, I just need to put again the point that this is a starting process. This is a set of policy statements and an initial step, but the implementation process will be start on April the 2nd.
I mean, I appreciate the clarity. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your time and to the community at large for participating in this. Thank you, Linda. I'm going to move you over.
We're going to go to Dana
Trustee
now,
Lopez,
I think.
do you want to? No, I'm speaking right now, Rika. I just want to finish the list here because I don't know if you can see it from where you are right now. Trustee Lopez, would you like for me to go to Hasbly? I'm so sorry, I did it again. Thank you. Or would you like to go to the questions? I know that this person has been waiting a little while. Do you mind if we bring them over?
They've been waiting a little while, so like I said
Please,
before,
please bring her over. She has typed a question, so.
Okay, no problem.
Hasbly has typed a question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you can unmute yourself now. I know that you were unable to unmute yourself when you were in the attendee list, but you should be able to speak now. Can you tell us your relationship to Ossining and give us your name and such? Thank you so much. And I'm sorry if I just did not pronounce your name correctly.
No worries. My name is, and I'm a resident of the
We lost
Briarcliff
you for a
community.
second there. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I said my name is Blady Ganslin, and I'm a resident of Briarcliff Manor, but I also form part of the police reform in my community. I had a question in regards more to the, this is more to the local government. Can the local government commit to writing resolutions on hot topic items like immigration, use of force, and police accountability? You know, I think this will set the I'm done.
Hasblady, could you repeat the very last bit? When you said, I think it will set the tone, and then it got cut off.
The tone and culture of the community.
Got it. Thank you. So this is something that historically the village has done with respect to certain issues. You take, for example, the green light law, like giving the ability for folks to get driver's licenses irrespective of their immigration status. The board a handful of years ago wrote a resolution in favor of that legislation. And so this is something that the board has done historically, and I'm confident we'll do in the future. It doesn't do it for every piece of legislation at every level, but it is something that with respect to the makeup of the board, whomever is on there and kind of what is going on, we'll continue to do moving forward. So thank you. Dana, questions from
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we have about 28 questions and comments. I've been going in order. I'm gonna ask a question from someone who hasn't been heard yet. Shadeen.
Dana, okay, if I can just pause you super quick. So I just wanted to a process comment. So what happened during the first engagement that we had 2 weeks ago, and what will happen next week as well, is although we had 90 minutes for this last week as well, we 2 weeks ago we extended it 2 hours. We're now at 2 hours 15 minutes. My sense is that it will take much more time to go through all of the questions. And what we did last time was we picked a point at which we would stop taking new questions, and we just named, these are the 1 or 2 final questions. That was around noon 2 weeks ago. And then the rest of the questions that are unanswered, we're going to be saving, and we're going to be considering those equally with the questions that were asked in person. So Richard Brady from Matrix and the board is aware, they are seeing all of the questions and comments in the Q&A. None of them are wasted, even if not all of them are read. So with that, if you could please go ahead, Dana.
Shadeen is a resident in Ossining. He asks, can you give specific examples of how the police interact or engage positively on a daily basis in Ossining?
Sure. So this is something that has come up at a number of public engagement events that we've had. The one that the mayor mentioned that we had a few weeks ago with Black men specifically. Some of it is through events that they have. Some of it is through just community policing engagement that have happened, tactics in the past. So one of the things that officers used to do, for example, is go door to door in the community, not to every single person, but in to try to get a sampling of different parts of the community, introducing themselves to community members, letting them know who they are. Now, one of the things that the officers do, for example, is we have a Spanish language officer that runs a Facebook page that gives updates to the Spanish language community on what's going on. It's those kinds of things formally happening from a programming perspective that help to bring a positive relationship with the police, so that the community is seeing the police not in a moment of stress, but in a moment where they can get to know them. And then in addition to that, there are individual police officers that form relationships with members of the community. But this is something that the chief has championed from his start about 5 years ago, and it goes from before that as well. Okay, next question, Dana.
So Pastor Sean Jones comments that he was on the working committee too, I believe. In respect to communication with the community, we must be mindful that there is a digital divide with much of Ossening's residents. And Dinah Lemon also emphasizes that perhaps we need a mailer program in order to reach people who aren't online. Nicholas Lopez would like to know how he could join the Civilian Police Review Board. How does that, I think we answered that. Did we answer?
Did, yes. It's on the website, the Get Involved page on the website.
Right.
So right now there aren't any openings on the CPCRB, but that is how you can indicate your interest for a future board. So one of the things, if you go on right now, what the board is doing is reviewing all the applications that have come in the past few weeks and months, and then we're opening it back up so that any openings that we have on current boards can be filled with folks that are indicating their interest. But recognize that that is the place to go to indicate your interest.
We have an anonymous attendee who says the Executive Order 203 is a two-part order, as I understand. One part deals with reform, in other words, training and the like, and the second part deals with policy change. The RFP agreement with the facilitator completely omits policy change. Policy change deals with accountability. Would you add policy change to the final draft with so little time left?
So I would argue respectfully to this anonymous person that policy has been a key part of this process from the beginning. We've both had a subcommittee focused on policy and a recognition throughout in a lot of these are policy changes. These are not just cultural changes or suggestions, but specifically changes in policy. And so I know that Richard nodding his head seems like he agrees. And so Dana, we can move on to the next question.
Okay, Lori Sullivan asks, is it possible to put a mechanism in place to report police misconduct that includes an anonymous ombudsman-like avenue that does not require the person to present themselves to the police department? Resident of 25 years.
That's helpful. So this is not something, and Richard, if this has come up before, please let me know. This is not something that has come up as an idea before, but this is in line with the kinds of rethinking of how police complaints should be made. So specifically in the recommendations, whether it's, I forget if it's the current ones or the ones that Roe and others have sent, but including the ability to send complaints online, to do so in a way that's as easy as possible. I think one of the things that we're also balancing is what are ways to do so in a way that is going to not cause unexpected consequences. So if we have anonymous complaints or complaints that are going to result in police officers being accused of things that they didn't do, and that's going to be part of their file, there's a kind of a thoughtfulness that needs to go with respect to a lot of these changes. Similarly, with if we do something like an ombudsman, that is something that we'd have to consider. What are the benefits and drawbacks of something like that? What problem is it looking to solve? But I would put that in the suite of changes with respect to how one makes a complaint to the police department, all of which is under consideration. Dana?
I would add to that, Omar, that there are a number of suggested recommendations relating to facilitating the ability to make a complaint either anonymously, online, directly to an expanded role for the CPCRB. But the other important part is that after that, greater transparency about those greater number of complaints being reviewed by the CPRB being made to the public.
Thank you, Richard.
Right. I want to add the topic of complaints. We got stuck on anonymous. If you take the word anonymous, which is one element of it, some of the complaints that people want to know about and how to report are not disciplinary ones, the serious ones, but behavior, attitude, etc. So we're taking that in as well, because that's something we have learned through this process. They're sort of customer facing in some way, or public facing. And I think that is a topic that's also being put into the bucket called, how does one
it seems like the mayor was cut off at the end, but I think we got the spirit of what she was saying. Thank you, Mayor. Dana?
I've had several people comment that they would like to see the draft that Roe mentioned in some form. I have a couple of comments and questions about Chris Malone. Aaron Moore writes, I understand, and this was 1998, an incident, I believe it was 1998. I understand that Chris Malone was shot 6 to 10 times. That being true, why does it take 10 shots to subdue any individual? And then Diana Lemon comments, the community needs to be clear about our community narrative. We need to make sure nothing like Chris Malone ever happens again in our community, like what also happened to George Floyd. That's me speaking as past president of the Ossining NAACP.
Okay, thank you, Dana. So with respect to the plan that Roe and others have produced, I can speak to the board to see if it makes sense in some form or fashion to publish that under the very clear headline of here are recommendations from a subsection of the working committee, and because the community would like to see it. I don't think there's any problem with the community seeing it. I just would want to make it very, very clear that this is a set of recommendations coming not from the entire working committee, because I think that's where the communication may get lost. And the question with respect to Mr. Malone, all those points are well received. I don't think anyone here is in a position to relitigate that particular case, but I just know that that has been brought up before. Matrix in particular is aware of that case and is incorporating it into the kind of recommendations we're making. And we appreciate the comments. Dana?
Juliana would like to reiterate the importance of getting police officers out of schools. I think it creates hostile and unsafe conditions for students. And I know that constitutionally, police officers don't actually have an obligation to protect folks unless they are in their custody. So I'm not really sure why they are there to begin with.
Okay.
I lost my internet. I think you might have addressed some of this when I was out, but I think this is this something the Board of Ed would need to address?
Right. So,
yeah. No.
Go ahead, Mayor.
I was going to say it's one of my questions for Wednesday. The chief of police is also speaking, I think, on Wednesday in front of the board in a session. With some of the comments he also has about the plan and the draft. And this is one of the questions I posed to him to get a better understanding of the relationship of police and schooling, which has come up in New Rochelle and Peekskill and other communities as well. So it's a topic that's come up in a number of conversations around the county. But the Board of Ed also, I think, absolutely should have input into that and let us have that input.
Okay, we're almost done. Allison McKinney would like to know if the Matrix PowerPoint is available online somewhere.
Yeah, so if you go to the police reinvention page, if you go to the villageofossining.org, scroll all the way to the bottom and click on the police reinvention, I forget exactly what it's called, but click on that and then you'll find it, right, a Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative, you'll find it there.
June Carver says there's a problem with follow-up process of applications for the board. I'm not sure which board, the Civilian Review Board possibly. I sent in an application, never received a response. How are these applications reviewed and followed up on?
Thank you. Yeah, so this was brought to my attention from a process perspective. We need to communicate with all the people that have already submitted applications and then moving forward, open it up for new folks that are indicating their interest. And so we will be updating folks in the next week or so.
Okay, I'm going to end by reading a comment from John Zeltzman, Ossining Branch NAACP Executive Committee member. I personally am concerned that the critique offered by Jermaine, Jerry, and Roe have not been effectively heard by the village. Their comments are troubling. The issue of accountability is at the heart of changing behavior. The issue of appropriate community representation is troubling. As Jerry presented, unvarnished, is that the consequence of murdering Black people cannot be considered without clear personal consequence, union contract notwithstanding. Changes need to be seriously considered. Having served on other Ossining citizen committees, there is clearly a pattern of sidelining their recommendations. Yes, trustees need to create an effective process, and the core issue of police behavior and police accountability must be seriously included, and the village board must engage policy changes. To the mayor's point, it's not about doing more, it's about doing the right thing.
Thank you, John. I hear you underscoring those points made by Jermaine, Jerry, and Roe. Message received. We're going to be saving the rest of the comments here that have come in after that point for the record and sending them to Matrix. I'll finish with some concluding words and then we'll hand it to the mayor and any other folks on the board or Richard or staff who would like to conclude as well. I just want to say thank you to at its peak, nearly 60 people who were a part of this conversation and still 40 46 brave souls here 2.5 hours later. Thank you very much for your engagement, for your serious thought, for your vulnerability throughout this process. This is not easy stuff to talk about, and these are not easy changes to make, and we love our community. That's why we are here. We really appreciate the time and energy and effort that you put into this, and so for first of all of the spectators, all of the, I'd say spectators, that's the name that I'm seeing on Zoom, all the community members that are here, thank you. Really appreciate you. To all of the folks on the staff and my fellow trustees, thank you. I'm eager for next week's session, which will be in Spanish. So I'll hand it to the mayor now.
Hi, I'm gonna echo Omar's words, and also Omar, thank you for moderating most of this. Omar was chosen for a couple of reasons, one of which he's the longest standing member of this working committee on behalf of the board. It is a really important topic to us. I appreciate everybody. It doesn't end here. Anybody can mail their thoughts, comments, feedback, new ideas that they thought about the minute we hang up today to bot@villageofossining.org. If you want to speak to each of us, we read all of our emails. We respond as soon as we can, either by ourselves or on behalf of the board. And I appreciate also the staff members that have been with us and our attorney who has been
It seems like we may have lost the mayor, but there was a lot of gratitude coming from the mayor. Thank you, Mayor Levin. Any other board members would like to speak?
I'd like to say something. I am new. I'm coming into this as of January 1. But I know that some of this, especially for people on the working committee, they had to access a lot of inner emotions and past traumas to do this. I want to acknowledge that we appreciate their courage, and that I personally am going to do everything I can to make sure we come up with something that we hand in on April 1 that can produce meaningful change. Thank you.
Bob or Manny?
Yeah, I mean, I echo the mayor's, I'm not going to repeat everything, but I echo everything, and we're looking to put forward what we can on April 1st. So I'm going to just not go over everything again. Manny?
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Omar, Dana, Mayor Levin as well. And I want to thank our community members for coming out today. Obviously, as was said, this is something that obviously we have a deadline, as it was mentioned, but I think that's something that's going to be on April 1st. And that's something that I will ask the community to always get engaged, always be participant of that. We cannot do our job without your feedback. So that's something that I had always asked, not just for this, but I think in general. We are representatives of the community. We are elected by the community to represent you. So without your feedback, positive or negative, I think is always helpful for us to understand the struggles and the pluses. You know, there's pros and cons for everything. And I think that's what we are here, the five of us, to put that into a balance, into a perspective that is suitable for our community. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? So I want to thank everyone that actually participated on this. We are still going to have a couple more, one more session after that, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop getting feedback from you. So please email us, try to reach out to us. The mayor already said bot@villageofossining.org. Please keep in touch. We're actually going to have a deeper conversation on this issue, as it was mentioned on a work session on Wednesday. The PVA is going to be there. Our police chief is going to be there. You know, so just, you know, keep watching our meetings and keep you know, your comments coming to us. So, and thanks Omar for moderating this process today.
Thank you. So with that, Richard, I know our friends from Matrix, did you have anything to say?
Oh, sure. I'll always take up that opportunity. Thank you, Omar. Well, I too want to thank the participants in this meeting here today and everything that's been done in providing input throughout the process and since we've developed the draft report through this month. And of course, I want to thank the mayor and you, Omar, as well as Dana and Jamie for making this report happen. So I want to just make one quick statement, and that is the purpose of this whole effort should not just be to meet the needs of reporting back to the state on 203. You certainly have to do that, but it's to develop a plan for policing for the future that is unique and appropriate for Ossining. Today, everything we've been involved with in the community since we started back in late fall has contributed to that, and will result in the board making a report to the state, but result in something that will be a living plan that will start on April the 2nd that will hopefully be supported by the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your time, energy, and effort. We'll be seeing you next week at 10 a.m. in Espanol. Thank you very much.